Experience and reflective thinking. The starting place in Dewey's philosophy and educational theory is the world of everyday life. Unlike many philosophers, Dewey did not search beyond the realm of ordinary experience to find some more fundamental and enduring reality. For Dewey, the everyday world of common experience was all the reality that man had access to or needed. Dewey was greatly impressed with the success of the physical sciences in solving practical problems and in explaining, predicting, and controlling man's environment. He considered the scientific mode of inquiry and the scientific systematization of human experience the highest attainment in the evolution of the mind of man. And this way of thinking and approaching the world became a major feature of his philosophy. In fact, he defined the educational process as a continual reorganization, reconstruction, and transformation of experience. For he believed that it is only through experience that man learns about the world, and only by the use of his experience that man can maintain and better himself in the world. Dewey was careful in his writings to make clear what kinds of experiences were most valuable and useful. Some experiences are merely passive affairs, pleasant or painful but not educative. An educative process, according to Dewey, is an experience in which we make connection between what we do to things and what happens to them or us in consequence. The value of experience lies in the perception of relationships and continuities among events. Thus, if a child reaches for a candle flame and burns his hand, he experiences pain. But this is not an educative experience unless he realizes that touching the flame resulted in a burn and moreover formulates the general expectation that flames will produce burns if touched. In just this way, before we are formally instructed, we learn much more about the world, ourselves, and others. It is this natural form of learning from experience by doing and then reflecting on what happened which Dewey made central in his approach to schooling. Reflective thinking and perception of relationships arise only in problematic situations. As long as our interaction with our environment is a fairly smooth affair, we may think of nothing or merely daydream. But when this untroubled state of affairs is disrupted, we have a problem which must be solved before the untroubled state can be restored. For example, a man walking in a forest is suddenly stopped short by a stream which blocks his path, and his desire to continue walking in the same direction is thwarted. He considers possible solutions to his problem, finding or producing a set of stepping stones, finding and jumping across a narrow part, using something to bridge the stream, and so forth, and looks for materials or conditions to fit one of the proposed solutions. He finds an abundance of stones in the area and decides that the first suggestion is most worth attesting. Then he places the stones in the water, steps across to the other side, and is off again on his hike. Such an example illustrates all the elements of Dewey's theoretical description of reflective thinking. A real problem arises out of present experiences. Suggestions for a solution come to mind, relevant data are observed, a hypothesis is formed, acted upon, and finally tested. Learning. For Dewey, learning was primarily an activity which arises from the personal experience of grappling with a problem. This concept of learning implied a theory of education far different from the dominant school practice of his day, when students possibly receive information that had been packaged and pre-digested by teachers and textbooks. Thus, Dewey argued the school did not provide genuine learning experiences, but only an endless amassing of facts which were fed to the students who gave them back and soon forgot them. Dewey distinguished between the psychological and the logical organization of subject matter by comparing the learner to an explorer who maps an unknown territory. The explorer, like the learner, does not know what terrain and adventures his journey holds in store for him. He has yet to discover mountains, deserts, and water holes, and to suffer fever, starvation, and other hardships. Finally, when the explorer returns from his journey, he will have a hard-won knowledge of the country he has traversed. Then, and only then, can he produce a map of the region. The map, like a textbook, is an abstraction which omits his thirst, his courage, his despairs and triumphs, the experiences which made his journey personally meaningful. The map records only the relationships between landmarks and terrain, the logic of the features, without the psychological revelations of the journey itself. To give the map to others as a teacher might is to give the results of an experience, not the experience by which the map was produced and became personally meaningful to the producer. Although the logical organization of subject matter is proper goal of learning, the logic of the subject cannot be truly meaningful to the learner without his psychological and personal involvement in exploration. Only by wrestling with the conditions of the problems at hand, seeking and finding his own way out, does he think, if he cannot devise his own solution, not, of course, in isolation, but in correspondence with the teacher and other pupils, and find his own way out, he will not learn, not even if he can recite some correct answer with 100% accuracy. Although learning experiences may be described in isolation, education for Dewey consisted in the cumulative and unending acquisition, combination, and reordering of such experiences. Just as a tree does not grow by having new branches and leaves wired to it each spring, so educational growth does not consist in mechanically adding information, skills, or even educative experiences to students in grade after grade. Rather, educational growth consists in combining past experiences with present experiences in order to receive and understand future experiences. To grow, the individual must continually reorganize and reformulate past experiences in the light of new experiences in a cohesive fashion. School and life, ideas and experiences which are not woven into the fabric of growing experience and knowledge but remain isolated, seem to Dewey a waste of precious natural resources. The dichotomy of in-school and out-of-school experiences he considered specially wasteful, and as he indicated as early as 1899 in The School and Society, from the standpoint of the child, the great waste in the school comes from the inability to utilize the experiences he gets outside the school in any complete and free way within the school itself, while on the other hand, he is unable to apply in daily life what he is learning in school. That is the isolation of the school, its isolation from life. When the child gets into the schoolroom, he has to put out of his mind a large part of ideas, interests, and activities that predominate in his home and neighborhood. So the school, being unable to utilize this everyday experience, sets painfully to work on another track, and by a variety of artificial means to arouse in the child an interest in school studies. Thus, there remains a gap existing between the everyday experiences of the child and the isolated material supplied in such large measure in the school. To bridge this chasm between school and life, Dewey advocated a method of teaching which began with the everyday experience of the child. Dewey maintained that unless the initial connection was made between school activities and the life experiences of the child, genuine learning and growth would be impossible. Nevertheless, he was careful to point out that while the experiential familiar was the natural and meaningful place to begin learning, it was more importantly the intellectual starting point for moving out into the unknown and not an end in itself. To further reduce the distance between school and life, Dewey urged that the school be made into an embryonic social community which simplified but resembled the social life of the community at large. A society, he reasoned, is a number of people held together because they are working along common lines, in a common spirit with a reference to common aims. The common needs and aims demands a growing interchange of thought and growing unity of sympathetic feeling. The tragic weakness of the schools of his time was that they were endeavoring to prepare future members of the social order in a medium in which the conditions of the social spirit were eminently wanting. Thus, Dewey affirmed his fundamental belief in the two-sidedness of the educational process. Neither the psychological nor the sociological purpose of education could be neglected if evil results were not to follow. To isolate the school from life was to cut students off from psychological ties which make learning meaningful. Not to provide a school environment which prepared students for life in society was to waste the resources of school as a socializing institution. Thank you for listening. For more videos about this subject, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Bye!